Hi everyone, welcome to Restless's second Facebook Live event. We've been following discussions on our community group as well as key themes in the media. And this week, the topic for our Facebook Live video is coronavirus scams. We have seen that a number of you have received scam emails or phone calls, which are incredibly believable, and all of them have been asking you for bank details. By the looks of it, a lot of you were able to identify that they weren't real, but many people won't be able to do that as the scammers are getting more and more sophisticated. Last week, our personal finance journalist, Mel Wright, wrote about some of the most common coronavirus scams, and I'll post the link to her article shortly. I have Mel with me here today, and she is going to answer some of your questions about the scams. So let me just introduce you to Mel. Here she is. Hi, Mel. Welcome.
Hi, Ash. Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Mel, first of all, could you introduce yourself? But before you do, we need to say that we're not qualified financial advisors in any shape or form, but you are an experienced national personal finance journalist, so you're pretty well positioned to spot the scams and let people know what to watch out for, what to do if they find themselves the victim of a scam. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's right, Ash. I've been covering personal finance for the last 20 years or so, and so cover subjects such as mortgages, savings, and unfortunately scams. So they're nothing new, but unfortunately we have seen a huge number of new scams emerge during this coronavirus crisis.
Okay, perfect. Well, Mel, thank you. So on to our first question. It's a really general one from one of our members. Why are we seeing such a proliferation of scams at the moment, and why is it that they're linked to coronavirus?
Well, it's really sickening that people are latching onto this. I think what they're really preying on is the fact that so many of us are feeling insecure. We're desperately worried about our finances. We're worried about the health of our families. And they're really preying on those insecurities. They're targeting us with scams that are linked to, say, organizations that we supposedly trust. They're trying to tell us that they're going to give us money. They're basically preying on our emotions, and they see this as an ideal opportunity to sort of get us when we're at our most weak.
It's so cruel. On that note, we've been contacted by another member who received an email last week that looked like it was from HMRC. It was asking for bank account details, and it also provided a mobile phone number in case the person receiving it needed more information. Thankfully, our member was able to identify that it wasn't a real email. But what would you say are the key giveaways with these emails for people, especially when many people will be expecting to hear from HMRC and the government in some way with coronavirus updates?
Well, I think this is part of the problem, Ash, is that it is institutions we know and trust that they're pretending to be. So, as you mentioned, the HMRC scam, there's also another one coming out from gov.uk, which is promising financial help to those being infected. The HMRC one promises a tax rebate. But I think what's vital to remember is that organisations like HMRC, like gov.uk, will never, ever ask you for financial information. They won't ask you for financial details. They won't promise you a rebate over text message or email or over the phone. So if that happens, you will know it is a scam. They simply will not do this.
No matter how professional the email looks, or no matter how identical to stuff authentic things that you might have received from them in the past, they'll never do that.
No, and I think if you're in any doubt at all, never click on a link, never call a number shown on a text message or an email. What you must do is ignore that and ring the institution involved. So contact HMRC, use the number you can find on their website, and contact them direct and say, listen, I've had this text. Is it legitimate? Is it a scam? And 9 times out of 10, unfortunately, I think it will be a scam, particularly during this time.
And I think it's important to point out that people aren't bugging HMRC by doing that, are they? HMRC like to know where the scams are coming from so that they can go and shut them down.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And they're very conscious that there's been a raft of these scams emerging. So they want to get to the bottom of these and try and shut them down, as you say, wherever possible. So you should not only report it to HMRC, but also Action Fraud, which is the country's national reporting centre for scams and fraud of this kind. Okay,
perfect. We can share those the details of Action Fraud as well after the video. So we all know that the adage that if it looks too good to be true, it usually is. So even if you're being promised big lumps in rebates or whatever from these scams, try not to believe it. It can be so tempting when we get an email promising us some money, though, to click in and find out more information.
Exactly.
Does it hurt to click on the link? Does it activate something once you've done? What actually is the process? Is it triggering something amongst the fraudsters? What point is it too late to kind of come back and keep your details safe and your computer safe?
So the golden rule is never click on a link. When you do this, it can promote something called malware to enter your computer, which is short for malicious software. And this can either be used to steal your bank details. So when you enter your passwords, your system might then have access to it, or it can be used to freeze all your information. And then they can use something called a ransomware type of software, which they can use to call you up and say, listen, we've locked all your files, do you pay us this money, and then we'll unlock the information. So don't click on a link. That's absolutely imperative. If you have, the first step should be immediately to take your computer offline, because that way the malware can't spread to other devices. So take your computer offline, run a security scan as soon as possible, and hope that that can identify what the issue is. Of course, if you're like me and not a technological whiz by any stretch of the imagination, it's better to get an expert involved and for them to thoroughly vet your computer and make sure any problems are resolved. It's also vital to back up your files regularly. Do that with a sort of independent hard drive, a USB stick or something, but make sure you've got access to that information so that if your computer is infected and your files are corrupted, you've at least got all that information backed up.
Thanks, Mel. We've had a few questions come in on the group. We've got one from Dan who says, what about emails coming in from my PayPal account or my bank account? He's received a couple of notices asking him to log in, but they must look slightly suspicious. Otherwise, I don't think he'd be asking us that question. So if it's something that we've already, rather than HMRC or government emails, if it's a company that we've got login details for that we use frequently, at what point do we become suspicious of those too?
I think it's very sensible to treat everything with suspicion, unfortunately. So if it is any company which you provide payments to, or they provide payments to you, and they're sending you an email which you weren't expecting, offering a link and telling you to click on that link, do not do it. Instead, follow the advice I've given before. Pick up the phone, contact that company directly, say, I have received this email, is it legitimate? I know it can seem boring and it's a pain, but it's well worth doing if you don't want your computer to be infected or to be fall victim to a scam.
Thank you, Mel. We've had another question through from someone called Bit of Tea asking, am I lovely? Yes, you must be. You're tuning in. Thanks for being a nice audience. So back to some of the questions that we've had emailed in advance. So Mel, there's an expectation now, I think, isn't there, that most scams are happening online. Is this the case in coronavirus times? Is it that we just need to be particularly vigilant when we're on our computers, or are there other types of scams happening as well?
Well, lots of scams are online, unfortunately, or they're sent by text messages, or people contact you by phone. But it's also important to realise that these scams are actually taking place face-to-face, which is really devastating during this time. We've got reports of people knocking on doors of the elderly and vulnerable, offering to do their shopping for them and asking for their money up front, only for them never to return. So I think we have to realise that these types of unscrupulous people will act in a whole range of circumstances. It's not just on your computer. So if you are in this situation where you need help with your shopping, there are community support groups set up to help with this. Don't ever rely on a stranger. Try and stick to neighbours and friends that you can trust. It's really depressing that this is happening, but I think people just need to be on their guard all the time.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good advice. So you've mentioned that there's different types of scams, people knocking on the door as well as online. Phishing is one term that people might have heard of in the past. I've also seen scams that are called vishing and smishing. These terms all have childlike almost sounds to the names that they've been given, but they're pretty sinister, aren't they? What's the difference between these three things? Phishing, vishing, smishing.
So they're all essentially a type of scam which is trying to get information from you, trying to get your financial details, any information that people can use to financially benefit from you. So phishing is an email scam, which is, as we've touched on, you click on a link and then you hand over your details. Vishing is simply a voice form of this. So when someone calls you and asks for information over the telephone. And smishing relates to SMS text messaging. So that's when you get a message, such as the ones we've already touched on, from HMRC, gov.uk, purporting to be an organisation that you're familiar with. And again, they're trying to get information from you that they can use for their financial gain. So essentially, it's three types of the same scam, but just different ways they're targeting you.
Okay, and that almost feels even more cruel with the text messaging, because it's such a personal form of communication for a lot of people, isn't it? Where it might just be their friends and family that have your phone number. They don't realise that the phone number can be bought or can be got hold of in a more sinister kind of way.
They can. It's really frightening. There are actually these things called sucker lists, which criminals sell on to each other, which are lists of people whose details they have and that they're supposedly going to be susceptible to this type of fraud, and they sell them on. So it's really frightening. And I think especially with text messages, you automatically assume that if somebody's got your number, they're legitimate and you must have given it to them at some stage. So I think it's particularly that type of crime which it's easy for us to fall victim to.
Okay, thank you. So to round up, Mel, because that's covered off all the questions that we've had in advance. I know you've touched on it already, but can you just let people know the key actions they should take if they've even had the slightest suspicion that they've been the victim of some type of scam, whether they've cottoned on to it in the early stages of that, for example, they might not have clicked on a link, right through to whether they've handed over their bank details. What should people do? What are the really simple steps that people should take to make sure that they keep themselves safe?
So first and foremost, just to reiterate, do not click on a link. Always contact the institution or organisation that it's supposedly come from. Check whether it's legitimate. It's unlikely to be. And remember that these organisations will never, ever ask you for financial details, nor will they promise you cash or rebates via text message or email. So steer clear. If you have clicked on a link already, contact your bank immediately and let them know what has happened. As we touched on before with regard to your computer, take it offline to stop any virus spreading to the other devices in your house, and run your virus software to try and eliminate any problem. Get in touch with a technical expert if you're struggling with that, and always report any instance of fraud or scam to Action Fraud. It's really important you do that. They will be able to offer you support, and hopefully with the more people report them, the more people they'll be able to take action against. And one thing I'd really like to touch on is the emotional impact of all this, because it can be absolutely devastating for people. And it's easy to feel really ashamed, but these type of scams are so convincing that many, many thousands of people fall victims to them every year. So, you know, if you're struggling with the emotional fallout and you're just embarrassed and don't want to tell anyone, do turn to victim support, do turn to the Samaritans, do talk to people around about it, because it's not just financial consequences it can have, it can be emotionally devastating as well.
Thank you, Mel. That's great. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, please, and you're not listening to this Facebook Live right now, please post below. We'll come back to it and we can answer it afterwards. We'll post the links some of the links that we've mentioned now. And if you're not already a member of Restless's Money Club, you can visit the Restless, www.restless.co.uk website, click on Money, and follow the stages to sign up to Money Club. And that's where you'll have weekly articles coming from Mel on all aspects of financial services. That's my phone going off, sorry. That's it. Thank you very much for your time, Mel.
Pleasure. Thanks, Ash.
Take care.